Mom, Dad, I'm okay.
A young heiress from one of America's richest and most politically connected families, kidnapped by a mysterious underground militia.
I just want you to know that I'm going to do everything I can to get you out of there.
Pretty soon God will touch their hearts and they'll send you home again.
But then, incredibly, the captive turns criminal.
I heard her say she would shoot the first SOB that moved or did anything out of line.
Joining her captors on a crime spree that climaxes in a massive shootout on live television.
America really hadn't seen anything like this before.
The public was outraged, confused, and fascinated.
Is she being coerced? Is she brainwashed? The whole thing was just so crazy.
To this day, the question still remains. Was she a willing accomplice or a brainwashed victim? More than 40 years later, only one thing is clear. Patty Hearst is notorious. For much of 1973, the U.S. was reeling from a series of bad news stories that left most of the country in a sour mood. America was in process of a humiliating withdrawal from Vietnam. President Richard Nixon was mired in the Watergate scandal. And inflation had soared past 6.1%, leaving many Americans feeling less well off. Leftist groups began protesting economic injustice, including a new violent, radical organization that called itself the Symbionese Liberation Army, or the SLA.
Those who would bear the hopes and future of our people, let the voice of their guns express the words of freedom.
February 4th, 1974, media heiress Patty Hearst and her fiancé, Stephen Weed, were at home in their apartment in Berkeley, California.
They were sitting home in their apartment one night, cooking dinner, when all of a sudden someone knocked at the door.
A young woman was at the door and said she was having car trouble and asked to use the phone. When Stephen opened the door to let her in, he was rushed by two men. They pushed him to the ground, punching and kicking him and threatening him with machine guns. Stephen pleaded with them to take what they wanted and leave him and Patty alone. But it wasn't a robbery. It was a kidnapping. And they were there for Patty Hearst.
Her fiancé was being beaten, and she was thrown to the floor and knocked unconscious. She was picked up, carried, and placed in the back of a car.
She was driven to a secret location and locked inside a 6-foot by 3-foot closet.
Locking her in a dark closet, not feeding her, not talking to her, is probably the worst thing you could do to a 19-year-old who had just been kidnapped and has no idea what's going to happen to her, not only day by day, but hour by hour.
Patty had no idea who her kidnappers were or what they wanted. The rest of the world would soon find out. The kidnappers sent a message to local radio station KPFA. They identified themselves as the Symbionese Liberation Army, or SLA.
The Symbionese Liberation Army is, if it wasn't so serious, it would be absolutely ridiculous. First of all, Symbionese means nothing. It was a made-up word. They didn't liberate anybody, and the army was about 12 to 15 people at the most.
They took credit for the abduction, which they called an arrest.
The SLA has arrested Patricia Campbell Hearst for the crimes that her mother and father have by their actions committed against we the American people and the oppressed people of the world.
The voice and leader of the SLA was a convicted bank robber named Donald DeFries, more commonly known by his nom de guerre, Field Marshal Cinquet.
They really imagined that America was on the verge of, becoming this sort of fascist, repressive Orwellian state, and that the people in America were right on the cusp of rising up in a massive revolution that they would lead.
The first target of their so-called revolution was California school official Marcus Foster. Foster was Oakland's first African-American school superintendent.
One of the things he did was he hired off-duty police officers to patrol the schools, not an unusual thing in an urban environment now. The SLA thought that was just an awful thing, it's the fascist pigs going into our schools, and if we go and just kill this guy, the community's going to rise up and start a revolution.
As Foster was leaving a school board meeting, 3 members of the SLA ambushed him in the parking lot and shot him to death with cyanide-laced bullets.
It was an assassination, plain and simple. And the community was horrified.
This group was just too far out there, too far to the left, and their motivations for doing what they did just didn't make sense to virtually anyone.
2 members of the SLA were arrested, Joseph Ramiro and Russell Little. The SLA hatched a plan. If they kidnapped a person with powerful political connections, they could negotiate the release of their jailed friends. All they needed was the right prisoner.
Patty Hearst represented the ruling class, and they felt by kidnapping her they were going to have real leverage. And they also felt that they would have support by kidnapping this representative of the ruling class.
The Hearst Empire is one of the empires of the ruling class, and whose interests serves the rich and are in direct contradiction with the interests of the people.
The SLA did not waste any time in taking credit for the kidnapping and letting everyone know what the prisoner exchange demand was.
When authorities heard of their demand for a prisoner exchange, the response was a resounding no.
They learned that their comrades would not be freed under any circumstances. The SLA devised a new plan. The SLA demanded $70 worth of food for every needy Californian, which would cost approximately $400 million. They wanted to redistribute money to the needy people from those who had it.
This new demand was meant to remake the image of the SLA, who had been condemned for the killing of Foster, even by other radical groups like the Weather Underground and the Black Panthers.
I think it was a crude attempt at public relations, or at spin. They wanted to create the image that they were Robin Hood, that they were somehow robbing the rich and benefiting the poor, when in fact they were just ordinary thugs.
The $400 million demand was addressed directly to Patty's parents, Randolph and Catherine Hearst.
Mom, Dad, I'm okay. I'm with a combat unit that's armed with automatic weapons. I just hope that you'll do what they say, Dad, and just do it quickly.
They released a series of tape recordings to the media. You just couldn't not listen to this stuff.
I want to get out of here, but the only way I'm going to is if we do it their way. There's no way that I will be released until they let me go. So it wouldn't do any good.
News reporters would be standing in front of the Hearst mansion, holding a radio, playing the broadcast of the SLA into the microphones on television, which would then go out around the country and around the world.
America was fascinated with the story. They hadn't seen anything like it. It was arresting. It was captivating.
I just want to get out of here and see everyone again and be back with Steve.
And the news media and the public alike took to it like catnip.
It was just so crazy you couldn't take your eyes off it.
Patty, I hope you're listening. We're really pleased to know that you're okay.
Randolph Hearst went out almost on a daily basis to talk to the media as an effort to communicate with his daughter and to communicate with the SLA.
I just want you to know that I'm going to do everything I can to get you out of there.
So the negotiations were actually happening on television. It was extraordinary.
Although Hearst was a billionaire, most of his wealth was tied up in his family's corporation. The $400 million ransom demand was impossible for him to meet.
Now, obviously, at this point, I don't see how I can meet a $400 million program. But I just want these people to know, and the members of the SLA, that I'm going to do everything in my power to set up the type of program they're talking about.
He struggled to meet the statewide demands of the SOA and attempted to placate them by offering a large food donation to the Bay Area.
Arrangements have been made for $2 million to be delivered to a tax-exempt charitable organization capable of making a distribution for the benefit of the poor and needy.
Distribution points were set up in poor neighborhoods throughout Los Angeles and San Francisco to hand out bags containing turkey, bread, milk, eggs, fruits, and vegetables. But the donation didn't go well.
It's an example of no good deed goes unpunished. They make the largest food donation to date, and it's unappreciated. People fight over the food, and today most people don't even remember it.
A lot of people showed up. There were over 1,000 people in line in some places, but then fights actually started to break out between police and some of the organizers.
In Oakland, organizers threw food down from a window at the 5,000-person crowd. A riot ensued, with one police officer getting stabbed and another man knocked unconscious.
This was the largest reported sum ever spent on a ransom. Even that didn't work. That wasn't enough for the SLA.
I've been hearing reports about the food program. So far, it sounds like you and your advisors have managed to turn it into a real disaster. It sounds like most of the food is of low quality. No one received any beef or lamb. Anyway, it certainly didn't sound like the kind of food our family is used to eating.
You can hear over the course of time this real transformation from her being sort of frightened to being kind of pissed off at her parents. You know, why aren't you doing enough, Dad?
I don't believe that you are doing everything you can, everything in your power. I don't believe that you're doing anything at all. You said that it was out of your hands. What you should have said was that you wash your hands of it. I wish God would touch your heart and get you to do something concrete to help me.
What was interesting about the recording was Patty was portraying her kidnappers as actually being reasonable people. People that could be negotiated with, people that had a cause. Of course, no one actually knew if she had a gun to her head or whether or not Patty was actually buying into the SLA propaganda.
I no longer fear the SLA because they are not the ones who want me to die. The SLA wants to feed the people and assure safety and justice for the two men in San Quentin. I realize now it is the FBI who wants to murder me.
2 months after the kidnapping, the SLA sent in a new recording that turned the evolving saga on its head and shocked the nation. Patty Hearst, daughter of the legendary Hearst family, was in the hands of a group of terrorists who called themselves the Symbionese Liberation Army, the SLA. The saga of Patty Hearst has been told in many books and movies, including 1988's eponymous Patty Hearst, starring Natasha Richardson. Now that the SLA had Hearst as a captive, they planned to use her in a criminal scheme that would make her notorious.
Patricia Hearst was the granddaughter of William Randolph Hearst, who was a media tycoon and kind of the Rupert Murdoch of his day, who was the basis of the famous film Citizen Kane.
How many heiresses can say that their grandpa is the inspiration for Citizen Kane? Not too many heiresses can say that.
William Randolph Hearst's vast media empire included 20 daily and 11 Sunday papers spanning 13 cities. By the 1920s, 1 in every 4 Americans read a Hearst newspaper.
The Hearst name was a household name all over the country and had been for a long, long time.
The grandfather of Patty Hearst made a name for himself in sort of pioneering yellow journalism, tabloid journalism. So it is sort of ironic that this would all sort of come back into play.
Patricia Hearst's father was the 4th son of William Randolph Hearst.
Patty's dad is the chairman of the board of the Hearst Corporation, which owns newspapers and magazines and TV stations and radio stations. She was the heiress to a very, very, very wealthy family. She was privileged at its peak.
Patty Hearst grew up in a 22-room house. She always had nannies and servants around to help out. She had an Arabian horse that she'd ride on her extended family's 86,000-acre estate at San Simeon. It was a privileged life.
Private schools, country clubs, ordinary upper-class young lady, really.
In 1974, Patty Hearst was 19 years old and living in Berkeley, California with her fiancé, Stephen Weed. Weed was 7 years her senior. They had met when Hearst was in high school. Weed had been her music teacher.
I think it's pretty safe to say that Patty certainly had some element of rebelliousness in her as a young adult.
The apartment was a short distance from the University of California, Berkeley, where Patty was enrolled. It was there, on February 4th, 1974, that Patty's strange ordeal began.
Mom, Dad, I'm okay. I just hope that you'll do what they say, Dad, and just do it quickly.
Your father's doing everything in his power, and I want you to know that millions of people all over the world are praying for you. I know it's been a long time, sweetheart. You keep praying. You've never harmed anybody, and I know that pretty soon God will touch their hearts and they'll send you home again.
After a series of outlandish demands and very public hostage negotiations that included multiple audio tapes, the heiress kidnapping story would soon take a turn that no one could have predicted.
I've been given the choice of 1, being released in a safe area, or 2, joining the forces of the Symbionese Liberation Army and fighting for my freedom and the freedom of all oppressed people. I have chosen to stay and fight.
It was Patty Hearst's voice, but to people who knew her, it didn't sound anything like her. I can't imagine that either the country or her parents could believe what she was saying.
Stephen, I've become conscious and can never go back to the life we led before. What I'm saying may seem cold to you and to my old friends, but love doesn't mean the same thing to me anymore. No one is free until we are all free.
Patty's voice on the audio tape was startling. Nobody had ever heard anything like that before.
That's where this story had completely gone in another direction.
One thing which I have learned is that the corporate ruling class will do anything in their power in order to maintain their position of control over the masses. And as a member of the ruling class, I know for sure that yours and Mom's interests are never the interests of the people.
It was a slap in the face to her family, and it was a rejection of cultural values.
The Hearst family, the FBI, and the public were bewildered. Had Patty joined the SLA and become a terrorist? Or had she been threatened or brainwashed?
The public didn't know what to think. We were left to our own imaginations. And I think that a lot of people thought that Patty had turned and had become part of the SLA. But I think a lot of people thought she was acting in order to save her own life.
I think one has to assume at this point that whatever she said yesterday was said under duress or in the hopes that she would get home free.
If you look at the tapes that Patty sent out, it starts off that she's regular old Patty frightened, and then as the tapes progress, finally she becomes Tanya, the urban guerrilla.
During Patty's captivity, the SLA regularly preached their agenda to her. Capitalist society was evil, and so was her own family. They would show her news coverage of her father claiming he was out of money for food drops. They told Patty that her father was lying and gambling with her life.
You could see how this incessant propaganda and the explicit and implicit threats on her life could leave her feeling vulnerable, leave her feeling like she would live longer if she went along with them.
Whether it was a matter of survival or brainwashing, Patty Hearst had joined the SLA. And the next chapter of her life would be as one of their soldiers. Nearly 3 months after being abducted by a radical group who called themselves the Symbionese Liberation Army, media heiress Patty Hearst was transformed from captive to notorious criminal.
I've been given the choice of being released in a safe area or joining the forces of the Symbionese Liberation Army. I have chosen to stay and fight.
Soon, the world would see just how committed Patty was to her new cause.
I've been given the name Tanya after a comrade who fought alongside Che in Bolivia for the people of Bolivia.
After Patty Hearst effectively joined the SLA, they gave her a sort of nom de guerre called Tanya, which she took on as her sort of revolutionary name. And the name actually came from one of Che Guevara's girlfriends, a famous revolutionary. All of the members of the SLA had these kind of nom de guerres. This was again something that they took from other revolutionary groups around the world.
The SLA consisted of 10 members. The leader was an escaped convict named Donald DeFries. DeFries had spent his teenage years and early adulthood in and out of detention centers and prisons.
He was a troubled guy. One early probation report stated that he had a schizoid personality with strong schizophrenic potential. One psychiatric testing facility recommended that he be jailed because his fascination with firearms made him dangerous.
In 1969, DeFries was convicted of attempting to rob a bank in Los Angeles, California, and sent to California's Vacaville State Prison. While behind bars, DeFries joined the Black Cultural Association, a group formed by inmates that helped prisoners develop educational skills with the assistance of graduate students from the San Francisco Bay Area. DeFries soon became a prominent member of the group, bonding with graduate students who shared his radical beliefs.
This is a group of middle-class white kids, all with college education, who had started out going on prison visits. They would go visit black prisoners. They wanted to feel oppressed. They wanted to feel like they were part of the revolution, that they had something to fight for. So they closely identified with black radicals.
In 1973, DeFries escaped prison and made his way to Berkeley, California.
Berkeley, California was a hotbed of student radicalism in the 1960s. The embers of that were still smoldering. DeFries began living with students while he was hiding from police, and he became their leader. He was charismatic, and the students were naive, and they looked up to him. And he turned their rebellious energy into something really radical and violent.
The first act of the SLA's misguided revolution was to assassinate Marcus Foster. This led to the plot to kidnap Patty Hearst. Now, the heiress was one of them.
In April 1974, the SLA conducted a series of bank heists, including an armed robbery that was captured by surveillance cameras.
There was a lot of speculation watching that tape of the robbery. Some people thought it looked like she was into it and smiling. Other people thought it looked like the other members of the SLA were holding their guns on her. But either way, she helped rob that bank.
Many discussions ensued at this time in the U.S. about whether Patty Hearst was a voluntary member of this now bank robbery crew or not. Could anyone truly be coerced into robbing a bank against their own will?
Certainly, if you look at the footage of the surveillance video, it's hard to make a case for Patty being forced to do this. In the tape, she came across as fully aware of what she was doing and looked like a regular old bank robber veteran.
What do you think about this idea that she's been brainwashed and that she really doesn't know what she's doing?
Based on the information contained with our interviews with witnesses and the investigations made, she was acting on her own free will, in our opinion.
Patty's parents claimed that the wide angle of the video showed Patty herself was also at gunpoint and had no choice but to participate.
There was no hint that she was under duress and being watched by anybody.
She seemed in command of herself.
She was in absolute command of herself, and there's no way out of it.
Did you get the impression that she would have used that gun?
Absolutely.
The still black and white photos of her toting that weapon, that became the new icon of this story.
I was positioned so that I could hold customers and bank personnel who were on the floor. My gun was loaded, and at no time did any of my comrades intentionally point their guns at me.
There was a clear change in opinion as far as the general public went about how they saw Patty Hearst. They didn't feel sorry for her, and she was now a bank robber, a felon, and she was wanted by the FBI.
That's the point where most people thought, okay, Patty has gone over to the dark side, and now we have to catch her. You know, this happens relatively quickly.
Like any father, you'd have a reaction to it. 60 days, she was a lovely child, and 60 days later, I had the picture of her in a bank with a gun in her hand.
Her picture was found in post offices, not as someone who's a kidnapped victim, but as a participant in a felony bank robbery.
I've never been forced to say anything on any tape, nor have I been brainwashed, drugged, tortured, hypnotized, or in any way confused.
Patty Hearst was now seen by law enforcement not as a captive, but as a threat to the public.
After the Hibernia bank robbery in San Francisco, they had to leave San Francisco. The police were closing in on them. They fled down to Los Angeles.
But it wasn't long before the SLA blew its cover.
Patty was with 2 SLA members, and they had decided to go to a sporting goods store to stock up on supplies. One of those members got caught shoplifting and began a loud argument outside of the store.
Patty was waiting in a VW bus across the street. When she saw the confrontation, she opened fire.
She sprayed the store with gunfire. I mean, up in the air. She didn't try to kill anybody or anything. She was just trying to scare people.
If you're deciding whether or not Patty is really part of this, it's getting less and less ambiguous. A little grainy photo in a bank with a gun is one thing. This is something else entirely.
The 3 SLA members fled on foot, abandoning the van, and unknowingly giving the police the clue they needed. In the van's glove compartment, the LAPD found a parking ticket, complete with the address of the SLA safe house. May 17, 1974, the day after the store shooting, the LAPD SWAT team surrounded the safe house.
The police were closing in on this house. It was announced over the police radio. All the news media in Los Angeles converged on this house. And because of this advancement in television technology, we're able to broadcast this live. And this was the first time in history that an unscripted event was broadcast live.
With over 400 police on the scene, they waited for the perfect moment to move in. They believed Patty Hearst was there, and they had orders to take her, dead or alive. When SLA members refused orders to surrender, police fired tear gas into the house. The SLA responded with gunfire.
Everybody in the country is watching this shootout happen on live television. At that point, nobody had ever seen anything like this happen, and it happened at prime time.
Nothing had been seen on television since the riots of the mid to late 60s that matched this in terms of violence and visual appeal. So there was a fascination, not just among the media, but among the public.
The house caught fire during the shootout. DeFries and others crawled through a hole in the floor into a crawl space beneath the house, where they continued to fire at police until the crawl space caught fire. Apparently burning alive, DeFries committed suicide by shooting himself in the right side of his head with a pistol.
5 suspected members of the Symbionese Liberation Army are dead following the bloodiest and most massive gun battle in the history of Los Angeles.
Everybody in America thought that Patty Hearst was in the house.
In an incredible twist of fate, Patty and 2 other SLA members had returned just as the police surrounded the house. They managed to drive off unnoticed, missing the massacre by mere seconds.
There was a great deal of rage, pent-up rage, on the part of the law enforcement officials and also the general public. They were fed up with what they had seen. They did not sympathize with the SLA, and there was a good deal of sentiment that Patty would deserve what she got if she was indeed inside that building. So I think there was a cathartic moment, not only for law enforcement, but for the public.
The world wouldn't know for hours that Patty was alive, and that the terror of the SLA and Patty Hearst was just beginning. Patty Hearst had been kidnapped and held for ransom by an organization that called itself the Symbionese Liberation Army, or the SLA.
I just hope that you'll do what they say, Dad, and just do it quickly.
I just want you to know that I'm going to do everything I can to get you out of there.
Pretty soon God will touch their hearts and they'll send you home again.
Then, a bombshell.
I've been given the choice of being released in a safe area or joining the forces of the Symbionese Liberation Army and fighting for the freedom of all oppressed people. I have chosen to stay and fight.
Patty Hearst declared she was no longer a captive, but rather a soldier in the SLA.
I've been given the name Tanya. It is in the spirit of Tanya that I say, Patria o muerte, venceremos.
As the tapes progress, finally she becomes Tanya, the urban guerrilla.
Dozens of books and films have attempted to shed light on the events, but nothing could match the real-life drama that unfolded in front of America's eyes.
Everybody in America thought that Patty Hearst was in the house.
5 suspected members of the Symbionese Liberation Army are dead following the bloodiest and most massive gun battle in the history of Los Angeles.
Everyone believed the heiress was dead, But the notorious Patty Hearst was very much alive.
It was only after they couldn't prove that Patty was in the building and that her remains were there that people realized that she remained on the run. I think that the news media found that interesting and enjoyed the fact that she was still on the run because it meant the story was continuing.
Patty Hearst and the remaining SLA members were still at large and in hiding.
When Patty witnessed, as we all did, the assault on the building and the vigor with which the law enforcement authorities went after the SLA, I think she was shocked, and I'm sure her captors did everything they could to reinforce the idea that, see, law enforcement, society, they've abandoned you. They don't care for you. They'd like to see you dead. That probably, if she hadn't already been turned, helped turn her.
It almost drew her closer to these people because law enforcement seemed to have turned on her and regarded her as a terrorist and wanted to kill her. You know, and there were wanted posters for Patty Hearst all over the place. She was America's most wanted. So why would she turn herself in?
5 days after the raid, Patty put out a communique. This one eulogizing the SLA members killed in the raid.
Greetings to the people. This is Tanya. I want to talk about the way I knew our 6 murdered comrades, because the fascist pig media has, of course, been painting a typically distorted picture of these beautiful sisters and brothers.
She also made the surprising claim that one of those killed, Willie Wolfe, who had adopted the name Cujo, was her lover.
Cujo was the gentlest, most beautiful man I've ever known. We loved each other so much, and his love for the people was so deep that he was willing to give his life for them.
Following the raid, the SLA replenished its ranks with 5 new members. In retaliation for the attack, the group launched a campaign of violence that lasted more than 9 months. They bombed police stations, courthouses, and even police cars. They robbed 2 more banks, killing a customer in the process.
The Patty Hearst case has now gone full cycle. The kidnapped heiress has officially been charged with kidnapping in Los Angeles County.
60 days, she was a lovely child, and 60 days later, I had the picture of her in a bank with a gun in her hand. How do you think anybody'd feel?
The question arises, why didn't Patty Hearst go home? Well, she watched that shootout on television as well. And she was sort of horrified because the news reports all thought that she was in the house, and yet the police went in and, in her mind, tried to kill her. So why is she going to go run to the police?
Life is very precious to me, but I have no delusions that going to prison will keep me alive, and I would never choose to live the rest of my life surrounded by pigs like the Hearsts.
On September 18th, 1975, 16 months after the SWAT raid, the FBI finally tracked Patty Hearst to an apartment in San Francisco.
One agent went to the back door, while the second agent went to the front door. As soon as the agent entering from the back door entered the home, he shouted at both women to get on the floor. Now, one of the women did, but Patty Hearst did not. She ran to the front of the house, where she came face to face with a second agent.
The Patty Hearst they found seemed different than the one who'd been abducted 19 months earlier.
Well, at the time of her arrest, Patty weighed about 87 pounds, and Patty's court-appointed psychologist described her as a low IQ, low affect zombie. In her initial evaluation, Patty showed clear signs of trauma, displayed significant gaps in her memory, and suffered frequent nightmares. These are all very typical post-traumatic stress disorder symptoms.
Despite the psych evaluation, now that she was in custody, she would face the consequences for the crime she committed while with the SLA.
Finally, Patty gets caught. There's got to be a trial. And it is, of course, the trial of the century. That's what they were calling it.
She commutes 20 miles to court each trial day and remains a puzzle to the last.
The day they caught Patty Hearst, she gave a clenched fist salute and listed herself as an urban guerrilla. Now, demurely dressed, sometimes near tears, she tells the jury of the horrors of kidnapping, of being terrified, brainwashed, her lawyer says, by the SLA. Is that the truth, or is she lying? That's what brings the mob of spectators here every day, and 200 reporters, television crews, artists, and producers.
All the media coverage who had been building up equity in this story, who'd been paying off this story all this time, now that they own the house, they're going to live in it. And the trial is, of course, what we expect to be the final act of the story.
The trial would hinge on the one question: did Patty commit her crimes willingly, or was she coerced? The trial of the century would only deepen the mystery of Patty Hearst. Patty Hearst, the famed heiress turned notorious terrorist, had been captured. It had been more than a year and a half since her kidnapping by the SLA. Now, as the world watched, she'd be tried for the crime she committed during her time with the terrorists. But were her crimes committed willingly, or was she just a victim brainwashed and forced to play along with the SLA's violent acts? With money no object, the Hearst family brought in the best lawyer money can buy, famed defense attorney F. Lee Bailey.
F. Lee Bailey is a superstar, a string of famous criminal acquittals behind him.
Patty faced a felony charge for her involvement in the infamous 1974 bank robbery. Could Bailey convince the jurors that the bank robbery that they had witnessed with their own eyes was not what it appeared to be?
I think she is the critical factor in this case. Her state of mind is something only she has access to.
Bailey's defense was complicated. He tried to convince jurors that Patty's behaviors were because she was effectively brainwashed, a victim of the then little-known phenomenon called Stockholm Syndrome. Today, many people think of Stockholm Syndrome when they think of Patty Hearst. It's a phenomenon where you start to identify with your captors. It describes pretty well what might have happened to Patty Hearst, but in 1974, it hadn't been heard of.
The problem that she faced from a legal perspective is that brainwashing is not a legal defense. The only legal defense would be to say that you were coerced. The jury didn't believe that she was coerced. The defense was, oh, I had a gun to my head the whole time. Every time I made these tapes, I didn't mean any of it. Everything I did, there was guns pointed at me, and I had no choice. And, of course, that's not true.
F. Lee Bailey's coercion-based defense stood at odds with the photos and statements that the jury saw at trial, and that the world had seen for the past 2 years. The prosecution, led by James Browning Jr., capitalized on this. They replayed the video of the bank heist and the recordings of Patty Hearst calmly taking credit for the crime. They also made a case that she had been in a romantic relationship with SLA member Willie Wolfe. The defense claimed he had raped her.
The prosecution claimed Hearst kept a gift given to her by Wolfe, which proved that she had lied about being raped by him.
Cousineau was the gentlest, most beautiful man I've ever known.
The mind is very, very complicated. And what happens in court is the prosecutors certainly try to make everything seem logical, and the defense tries to make everything seem illogical, and the truth is really somewhere in between. It's not one or the other.
Bailey put Hearst on the stand with disastrous results. She pleaded the fifth 42 times, greatly damaging her credibility. The prosecution pressed its case.
In a closing prosecution statement that hardly made mention of Hearst having been kidnapped, the prosecutor suggested Hearst had taken part in the bank robbery without coercion.
The defense's closing argument was further undercut by the judge's instructions to jurors that brainwashing was not a legal defense, and that Hearst could be found not guilty only if she were acting out of an immediate fear for her life. On March 20th, 1976, the jury found Patty Hearst guilty. Hearst was sentenced to 7 years in prison. But during the 1970s, public opinion began to shift on the subject of brainwashing, causing many to rethink Patty's guilt in the commission of the SLA crimes.
By 1979, a lot of things are happening in the country that make us rethink, or make a lot of people rethink, the whole Patty Hearst story.
Cult leader Reverend Jim Jones persuaded hundreds of his followers to commit mass suicide by drinking cyanide-laced fruit punch in what will become known as the Jonestown Massacre.
It was hard to look at the number of people there that drunk the Kool-Aid without taking seriously the possibility of brainwashing and getting people to do things that are, in this case, totally against their best interest.
President Jimmy Carter, moved by the details of Patty's case, felt that she had been poorly served by the justice system and commuted her sentence. The 24-year-old had served 22 months. She was released on February 1st, 1979.
Patricia Hearst walked out of prison a free woman this morning after spending nearly 3 years in various prisons and jails and just 3 days short of the 5th anniversary of her kidnapping. A nationwide campaign had been waged urging President Carter to release her.
There it is. The commutation.
Patty, I believe, says that this was a scripted thing she had to say, that it was a join us or die situation. Others have said that she was brainwashed. And others have even said that there was much more of a simpatico between Patty and these people. It's still very unclear after all these years.
Patty was subsequently pardoned by President Bill Clinton in 2001, making her the only person in American history to have their sentence commuted by one president and pardoned by another. After her release from prison, Hearst married her former bodyguard, Bernard Shaw. Hearst subsequently wrote several books and parlayed her celebrity status into an acting career, appearing in 4 John Waters movies, including the 1990 musical Crybaby. Today, she is a proud wife and mother.
It was quite a ride for her, and quite a ride for the country, quite frankly. She started out as a wealthy woman, relatively pampered by her family, and as of 2001, when she was pardoned, you could say she was right back where she started.
The heiress who gets kidnapped becomes one of them. And whether or not that was through brainwashing, whatever it was, that, I think, was a story that none of us could resist, because it makes us ask our own questions. How much is our own identity secure? What would we have done in those kinds of situations? If Patty can be convinced so quickly, what is it about the nature of this message?
I think far too much time has been spent trying to analyze Patty Hearst, as if there's something about Patty Hearst that can explain all of this. There isn't. It's what we made of Patty Hearst that's interesting. It's what she symbolized, both for the SLA and for us who watched this drama play out. So to try to parse, was she this, was she that, it's not really about her. It could have been anyone.
The story of Patty Hearst continues to fascinate. Was she coerced or acting on her own free will? We may never know the truth. And that's why Patty Hearst will always be notorious.